Hi, welcome to SBR Videos. I'm Peter Loshak. NFL Week 14 is in the books, and we are going to talk with professional sports bettor Teddy Covers, thinking about some things we might have learned from what happened in Week 14. Teddy Covers, the first thing that jumps out at me, I mean, we don't expect you to be dead on with everything you say in these calls, but you were dead on with your call on Carolina bouncing back with a big defensive performance last week. You said that Carolina, the quotes coming out of the locker room were that they were embarrassed about what they had done in Week 13. They were going to come back and give a big, defensive performance in Week 14. Wow, that is a sign of a really good team. Carolina Panthers, what do you have to say about them, Teddy Covers?
Well, I appreciate the kudos. It wasn't a great weekend for me in the NFL by any stretch of the imagination, but that's one that I did get right. And of course, when we look at Carolina, this has been, when we look at the history of teams that have started the season 10-0, 11-0, 12-0, 13-0, in the history of the NFL, no team has ever remained undefeated and yet been favored by fewer points in those games than the Carolina Panthers, which tells us very clearly that even after all of the success, the markets have not accepted Carolina as a truly elite team. Maybe that changes after Sunday because that was a pretty dominant effort. That was a game that was over in the first quarter. You don't see a lot of NFL games that are over in the first quarter, but the Panthers did that this past week. And let's not forget, when Cam Newton was at Auburn and the Auburn Tigers were undefeated and covering point spread after point spread after point spread down the stretch run of that undefeated season, and everyone out here in Las Vegas was saying, they can't do it, they're overrated. They were never overrated. This Panthers team has been overrated basically at any point over the last two seasons.
Right. College, though, a little bit different from the NFL. And I'm thinking, you said maybe that the markets will adjust this Sunday. And maybe, I'll tell you what I'm thinking, Teddy Covers. It might be time to switch gears here and maybe start thinking about fading the Panthers because, they have injuries, right? They've got the first round bye clinched. And of course, they're never going to say, yeah, we're going to mail it in this game. But you have to assume that these guys are, I know they're looking towards, an undefeated season and winning the Super Bowl and everything. But if they start to become a big favorite over these last three games and they've got little to nothing to play for, I think we might start seeing some maybe opportunities to bet against the Panthers, or do you not think that that's the way it's going to go?
It wouldn't shock me at all if they lost at the Giants this weekend. The Giants are coming to play. And if Carolina doesn't bring that same level of intensity, they are most assuredly on upset alert. But that being said, Carolina's a better team than the Giants. And this is a game that as the week goes on, you want to do a little bit more reading about, see if we can get in the heads of the Panthers a little bit. But the standard methodology of handicappers, this team, they're taking it easy. They don't care. There's nothing to play for. I don't buy any of that stuff. If you talk to people that are in locker rooms, they don't buy any of that stuff. It's stuff for talking heads to create content for, not anything that's going to base a handicap of the game. The question is Carolina going to bring their A game to the Giants, or are they a little bit fat and happy? And that's the goal of any astute handicapper, to find out. Not to say, maybe, this team doesn't care. They care. But that may not be enough.
All right. And then another team that had an eye-popping performance on Sunday was the Seattle Seahawks, right? The question is, how strong are they right now? Exactly 4 straight ATS covers, and the last 2 were by huge margins. Their next 2 games are home games against relatively weak teams. They'll be a big favorite in both those games, but, maybe they're a super strong team right now, and will have betting value even as a huge favorite at home against both the Browns and the Rams. What's your read on Seattle right now, Teddy?
See, the Seahawks are an interesting take. They really are. First, they just beat Jimmy Klaus, okay? They beat Jimmy Klaus earlier this year, 26-0 at home. Now they beat him on the road. They've beaten Jimmy Klaus 64-0 this year. The Ravens, a shell of a team, so they beat nobody. The week before, they beat someone in Seattle, but if you watch the Seahawks beat themselves that game as much as the Vikings beat themselves that game as much as anything else. So Russell Wilson's playing at an incredible level right now, and the Seahawks passing game is as dangerous as any in the league. And this team is in the top 5 of my power ratings for the first time, I think, since week 1. Seattle has moved that high, but I don't want to say that all the Seahawks' woes are behind them. They've just beaten 2 struggling teams, and they don't face the toughest of competition down the stretch either. But I wouldn't be shocked to see Seattle enter the postseason as a little bit of an overvalued commodity as opposed to an undervalued one.
Okay, and then the next interesting result from Week 14 I want to get to, Denver losing outright as a big home favorite. The Sharps took Oakland on that one, and they were right. Denver, though, kind of shot themselves in the foot in that game. Their defense actually played as great as ever. They got the loss, though, and, so going forward, what do we expect from Denver? They have an interesting game coming up against Pitt where they're actually a pretty big underdog, which is a little bit, I guess, surprising considering how dominant they are on defense. They are, though, coming off of a home loss as a big favorite. What's your take on Denver's straight-up loss as a big favorite to Oakland?
Well, the Broncos have now scored, one touchdown in the last 2 weeks?
Yeah.
I mean, this offense under Osweiler, and I made a lot of money with Osweiler the first couple of weeks when he was behind center, but it's not working. Demaryius Thomas and Osweiler do not have that connection that Manning and Osweiler did, and that has affected the rest of the receiving corps. And even though Thomas had a good handful of catches on Sunday, they're not the explosive plays. He had a couple of drops where the ball's not in the position that he likes to catch, and he's not playing at his best right now. And Denver's offense is clearly going to be problematic moving forward. That being said, this is a defense that's capable of hanging tough with anybody. And Oakland, they have 15 drives and 130 yards. The only reason they won the game was thanks to a safety and a muffed punt or a muffed punt return by Denver that gave Oakland the ball at the 11-yard line in the fourth quarter. And they had one drive where they were able to punch it in, or 3 plays for them to punch it in. Denver's there's a lot of market support for Pittsburgh right now, and the Steelers are another team that has made tremendous jumps in a lot of people's power ratings over the last couple of weeks. So that's why the upcoming point spread is where it is. As you mentioned, it is a lot of points for a good defensive team, especially going against an opponent that's coming off a huge divisional victory. All
right, so it sounds like you're looking at Denver as actually maybe a little bit undervalued right now, if anything.
I'm not in a rush to stay. Denver for me they're a hard team to correctly price right now because you make a sense they were massively overvalued following that 9-0 start. You can make a case that they were massively undervalued when Brock Osweiler took over. And now you can make a case, all right, their offense is struggling, the defense. It's worth noting, all 4 Broncos safeties, their top 4 safeties, were all hurt on Sunday. That's an injury report you really want to check before you take Denver plus the points against an explosive Steelers offense.
Right. All right, and then I want to ask you about the biggest line move of the week last week, and that was Detroit against the Rams. Right, Detroit opened as a 1-point underdog, closed, got all the way up to like 3, maybe even 3 minus 120. I think I saw, and there was multiple sharp action, a ton of sharp action reported to be on the Lions, and look what happened. Lost outright, didn't even cover the opening number. What's your takeaway from that result and the betting action on that game?
I mean, the Lions got my money, I'll tell you that. I was looking to fade St. Louis at every opportunity, and I thought it was a reasonable opportunity. Obviously, it was not. And a lot of it had to do with Detroit. But look, let's give the Rams credit for something. And I watched the game. I still can't figure out what happened. The Rams' offensive line had played at if you were grading them out, they probably would have gotten an F for 4 straight weeks. I mean, the absolutely inept offensive line play. They couldn't do anything with Todd Gurley. They couldn't protect whoever was behind center, whether it was Keenum or Foles. And they couldn't, obviously, score points or win games when your offense is inept. And then all of a sudden they face the Lions, who've been pretty good against the run, and Gurley goes for $160 or $140 on the ground and scores a couple of touchdowns, and the offensive line is blowing holes open, and the Lions pass rush isn't getting there. And I don't know if Jeff Fisher read on the riot act. I don't know if all the practicing helped. Certainly maybe the offensive coordinator change from Frank Cignetti helped St. Louis this past week, but a lot of it was the Lions being the Lions, which if you're from Detroit or have been backing Detroit at any stage this season or this decade or this century, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Seems like the Lions are just a team that, in any situation, if I hear that there's sharp action coming in on them, it's not one of those situations where I'm likely to immediately just tail that sharp action, that sharp opinion. All right, some interesting results from NFL Week 14. Is there anything else that you'd like to bring to our attention that might indicate possible betting value going forward?
Well, I wanted to talk about the 2 quarterback injuries. There were 2 significant QB injuries in the NFL on Sunday. And of course, one of them, Andy Dalton, going down for Cincinnati. I mean, the Bengals are a Super Bowl contender, and we don't know how long Dalton's going to be out. The markets have made a significant downward adjustment with A.J. McCarron behind center. But let's not forget, McCarron, 36-4 as a starter at Alabama, hasn't gotten a chance at the NFL level. He showed some promise last week. And reading the quotes out of that locker room, I don't think there's necessarily going to be a huge downgrade for Cincy, even with their backup QB on the field. However, when it comes to both the Colts and the Texans in a world of hurt at the QB position right now, we could see a game that could decide the AFC South title with T.Y. Yates facing off against Charlie Whitehurst. That's an ugly combo, and both of those QBs bet against moving forward. The Brian Hoyer concussion issues are problematic for Houston. It's going to get ugly. And for Indy, it doesn't look like Andy Dalton's going to be back. And when you're listing the bottom tier backup or third string quarterbacks, man, Charlie Whitehurst should go right to the top of that list. He flamed out in Seattle. He flamed out in San Diego. He flamed out in Tennessee. And all three of those teams gave him legitimate shots to win the job and to take it and run with it. And Whitehurst crashed and burned all three times. It could get ugly for Indy if Whitehurst is behind center on Sunday.
All right. Interesting thoughts. As always, Teddy Covers. We'll be back next week to recap NFL Week 15. Thanks, Teddy.